Welcome to Extracting the Essential on the Feet and their role in breathing. Where did I get that idea? I'll do my best to explain it clearly by breaking down the role of the pelvis into two different roles, two different parts. The first one is to understand the role of the pelvis in breathing. So the pelvic floor, the muscles that hold the base of these bones, I'll keep it at the essential. We can go into more detail in another video. The base of the pelvis, we'll call the pelvic floor, has a role in breathing such that when the lungs inflate, the diaphragm, the main respiratory muscle, the main breathing muscle, has to contract. When the diaphragm contracts, the pelvic floor has to release. The relationship between diaphragm and pelvic floor is what we call antagonist muscles, similar to bicep and tricep. I have another video explaining the antagonist muscles. For now, just to understand that when the diaphragm contracts, the pelvic floor has to release. If the diaphragm has too much resistance coming from the pelvic floor, the diaphragm will have trouble contracting, and that'll affect the respiration, the breathing. I'll come back to this once I've explained the second part. So we understand that the pelvic floor has to mobilize to allow respiration to happen. Another role that the pelvic floor has is, it's called the center of gravity, is to hold, if you look at the body from head to toe, it's about halfway from top to bottom and from front to back. And so it's considered the center of gravity or the center of our weight. So as I was beginning to explain just a few moments ago, its main role is to hold our weight and then distribute our weight. Similar to a wheel, we have the central hub that then distributes to the spokes. Very similar in our body, we have the central structure, the central force that then distributes it according to the regions of the body. In the anatomy books, it tells us that the lower half of the body is meant for weight bearing and the upper half of the body is meant for breathing. Again, more videos on the essential of this, of course. So what we want to understand is then how to distribute the weight in such a way that the pelvic floor doesn't have to hold everything up by itself. In other words, if the pelvic floor is too busy stabilizing, it won't have a chance to mobilize and then affect the breathing. I'll repeat that. If the pelvic floor is too busy stabilizing all on its own, it won't have any room to mobilize, which will then create too much resistance on the diaphragm, and the diaphragm won't be able to contract. To allow the pelvic floor then to have that perfect balance between stability and mobility, we want to understand the role of the feet. We can start to connect now how the feet will help to relieve the diaphragm by acting on the pelvic floor. The feet are meant for weight bearing and so can create like a team. The pelvic floor won't be alone. The feet will be team members, or as I like to show here, through a muscle chain. What we're seeing here is the muscle chain, just outlined through these blue lines here that show the tip of the spine, called the tailbone or the coccyx, is held by this muscle chain to each heel. So if you can just imagine almost like a tripod holding from the base of the body to support the upper body. There is another tripod in the front of the body, which I won't get to too much. I just wanted to mention it in this video as well. So then if I return to this idea of the tripod from the pelvic floor, to which the tailbone connects to the heel. So the pelvic floor attaches to the tailbone, which is then on the same muscle chain to the feet. So if we have this idea of a tripod, can I distribute my weight easily? To go into more detail, I'll show, this is my friend Rex, he's my classmate, and I'll show you how the feet hold the weight. So very simply, oversimplified, of course, because it's a bit more sophisticated in the body. I've put these elastics to show the 3 arches. I'll use the simple terms because we're just extracting the essential. I won't go into the anatomy terms. We have an inner arch from the big toe to the heel. We have an outer arch from the pinky toe to the heel. And we have what's called a transverse arch from the big toe to the little toe. I should say more specifically, from the base of the big toe to the base of the pinky toe. So these 3 arches, the way they intertwine and intersect, will together create a sort of a dome at the base of the foot. Domes are very strong in terms of engineering and architecture. They're very strong structures and can hold a lot of weight relative to their size. So we have 2 domes holding us up at the base of the feet. And when we walk, the feet have a similar motion than the diaphragm. They go down and up, and so create a certain pulsation, which also helps the blood flow, to be visited in another video. To put this to practice then, I'll invite you to stay standing and to feel how your feet meet the ground. Again, we'll do a short practice to extract the essential, and once you've understood it, I invite you to continue to practice it throughout your day. Now, standing on both feet, bring your attention to where each foot meets the floor. Don't do any correcting yet. Notice what happens when you're not paying attention. Pay attention to what happens when you're not paying attention. Notice the pressure underneath the right foot as it meets the ground and the pressure underneath the left foot as it meets the ground. Notice where you feel most of the pressure. Is it more on the front, more on the back, inner edge, outer edge? And it's very likely different on each foot. Very likely. It's more unlikely that it's exactly the same. So notice the differences. Sometimes you can notice when you take off your shoes, which part of the shoe is the most used up. And that will give you an indication of where you tend to put most of your weight. To help distribute the weight then, I invite you to lift all 10 toes and notice how your weight will shift. This is natural. And then keeping your toes lifted as possible, find these 4 points on each foot. I'll describe them after I've reminded you that the toes are not made for weight bearing. The toes are for dexterity, hence mobility, not stability. Don't rely on your toes for weight bearing. Rely on these, what we're going to explore, 4 corners. So with your toes lifted, feel how you can shift forward and backward. So you feel more in the base of the toes, more in the heels. And then see if you can exaggerate. Bring all your weight into the heels and notice how your body has to resist from you falling on your back. And then notice as you shift your weight forward, how much the body has to work to avoid you falling on your face. Notice how much work the body has to do when we're not in balance. And as you go back and forth each time more subtly, you'll notice these subtle efforts the body has to make. We made them obvious. Now we can feel the subtle efforts the body has to make when we're not in balance through the distribution of our weight. So I'll use a random number. If I weigh 50 kilos, I have 25 in the front and 25 in the back. Random number. And then I can do the same right to left. If your toes need a break, give them a break. Otherwise, continue with your toes lifted and shift all of your weight into your right foot. Your left foot stays on the ground. Just, if you can, put your 50 kilos into your right foot. Notice how the body has to work. And then bring all of your weight into your left foot. Bring your 50 kilos into your left foot. And then again, go from obvious to subtle and start shifting from right to left. More and more, the swaying becomes more and more small each time so that it's more and more subtle for you to feel this perfect balance between right and left, such that your weight is evenly distributed between each foot and each of the 4 corners on each foot. So there are 4 corners times 2 feet. So you would weigh 50 kilos divided by 8 in each point. I know I should have used a round number. I apologize. Without doing the calculators, just go into sensing and find the most balance you can for today. And then as you release the toes, see if you can keep your weight distributed as it was without shifting weight into your toes. Take some practice. So I invite you to continue to practice. And once we've set up the feet to help support the weight and aid the pelvis, the pelvic floor then feels it doesn't have to do all the work. It can then feel a relief. And so I invite you as well to take a big breath of relief, inflate and inhale as best as you can comfortably. And then with a sigh of relief, feel your whole body thanking you for this alignment. This was Extracting the Essential. Many more videos in line with this. So hope to see you practicing again soon.